Jason is actually dead the whole time. One of the most popular theories fans kick around is that Jason Voorhees never truly came back from drowning in the first movie. Instead, everything that happens in the sequels is Jason acting as some kind of undead revenant. Think about it. At the end of the original Friday the 13th, 1980, Pamela Voorhees is the killer avenging her drowned son. Jason appears only in the final scare, leaping out of the lake, grotesque and rotted. It's ambiguous whether that's real or a dream, but by part 2, Jason is alive, grown up, and somehow living in the woods like a backwoods hermit. That timeline doesn't make sense if he really drowned as a boy. So fans argue he actually did die, and the Jason we see later is a zombie. The final chapter seems to kill him for good, but then part 6, Jason Lives literally resurrects him with a lightning strike, turning him into a full-on supernatural killing machine. From then on, his strength, durability, and ability to survive gunshots, fire, and explosions all line up more with an undead monster than a man. This theory explains why Jason seems unstoppable. He isn't human anymore. He's been dead since 1957. Jason is a body-hopping parasite. Jason Goes to Hell, 1993, gave fans one of the weirdest twists in horror history. Jason's spirit can jump from body to body, keeping him alive even when his physical form is destroyed. The movie shows him possessing morticians, police officers, even family members, while his true essence can only be killed with the mystical dagger. But here's the crazy part. Some fans believe this parasite angle explains every inconsistency in the series. How does Jason go from being a shaggy hermit in part 2 to a hulking brute in part 3? Why does he survive so many impossible injuries? Why do his powers change from film to film? Because he isn't tied to one body. He's been swapping hosts whenever he needs to, carrying his rage and memories into the next vessel. That makes Jason less of a person and more of a demonic infection. It even explains the dream Jason we see at the end of part 5, when Roy is the killer. Maybe Jason's essence was still out there, influencing others until it found a new body. Pamela wasn't alone in the first film. The official story is simple. Pamela Voorhees was the sole killer in Friday the 13th, but some fans think there's evidence Jason helped her, even in the first movie. When you watch closely, some of the kills don't quite match up with Pamela's abilities. She's a middle-aged woman, not a superhuman, yet she manages to string up bodies in trees, throw someone through a window, and overpower young, athletic teens with ease. The theory goes that Jason, or at least a deformed, still living Jason, was assisting her in secret. It would also explain why she speaks so confidently about Jason wanting vengeance.
Kill her, Mommy.
Maybe he was actually with her, unseen by the campers and the audience. If true, Jason's first official appearance as a killer wasn't part 2, it was in the shadows of the very first movie. Jason is actually immune to time. Some fans argue Jason's biggest power isn't his machete, his strength, or even his immortality, it's that he exists outside the normal flow of time. Here's the reasoning. The Friday the 13th timeline is notoriously messy. Jason goes from child to adult in a very short span, then spends decades killing teenagers who always seem stuck in the present day. Whether it's 1981, 1985, or 1993. The movies never explain how the world moves forward, but Jason never seems to age or decay in any way that slows him down. By the time we get to Jason X, he's still the same hulking monster even 400 years in the future after being frozen in stasis. Fans argue this isn't just coincidence. Jason is unstuck from time. He doesn't age, he doesn't wear down, and he doesn't follow the same rules of progression as everyone else. That's why the continuity of the series feels so off. This theory reframes Jason as less of a zombie and more of a fixed point in history. A figure destined to keep returning, no matter what year it is, because time literally can't move him forward. If you're still watching, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. Jason is a manifestation of collective fear. Here's the more psychological take. Some fans argue Jason isn't real at all, at least not in the traditional sense. Instead, he's a manifestation of the collective guilt and fear surrounding Camp Crystal Lake. The idea is that the teen's negligence caused Jason's drowning. His mother's rage created a legend. Over time, That legend became so powerful that it literally manifested Jason as an unstoppable force of vengeance. Think of him as an urban legend given flesh, a boogeyman who grows stronger every time people tell his story. This explains why Jason changes so much from film to film. Sometimes he's a hillbilly, sometimes a zombie, sometimes nearly superhuman. He's whatever the survivors expect him to be, their fear shaping him into a living nightmare. It also makes sense of Freddy versus Jason. Freddy thrives on fear too, so the crossover basically becomes two legends feeding on human terror, battling to see which nightmare wins. Jason is immortal because of the curse on Crystal Lake. Another theory ties Jason's survival to the lake itself. Crystal Lake isn't just water, it's cursed ground. Some fans suggest that Jason's repeated resurrections, from drowning to lightning strikes to toxic waste, are possible only because the lake is a supernatural hotspot. Look at the evidence. Pamela drowns victims there. Jason emerges from it as a boy at the end of the first film. He gets pulled back into it multiple times, and in Jason Takes Manhattan, toxic waste from New York's sewers somehow transforms him back into a childlike state, only to rise again later. The lake resets him. If Crystal Lake is cursed, then Jason isn't just a killer, he's its guardian. The camp is doomed because it sits on ground that refuses to let him rest. That would explain why attempts to move him away, like in Jason X or Jason Takes Manhattan, never really stick. He's bound to the lake. Jason is actually two different people. Fans sometimes point out that Jason looks drastically different between movies. In part 2, he's a skinny hillbilly in overalls with a sack on his head. By part 3, he's a hulking brute who could snap people in half. And his physical build keeps shifting, sometimes taller, sometimes shorter, sometimes more deformed, sometimes less. One theory says that's because we're not always looking at the same Jason. Some fans argue Pamela's son really did drown in 1957, but a second boy with deformities was mistaken for him and grew up near the camp. That second Jason took on Pamela's rage and became the killer we know. It's a stretch, but it would explain the massive inconsistencies in his look and abilities, especially in the early sequels. Instead of sloppy continuity, maybe there really were two different Jasons operating under the same legend. Jason has a healing factor like Wolverine. Fans joke about Jason being unkillable, but some theories take it seriously, suggesting he has a healing factor similar to Marvel's Wolverine. Throughout the franchise, Jason is stabbed, shot, lit on fire, drowned, hanged, and blown up, yet he always returns. Some movies explain this with supernatural resurrection. Part 6, Jason lives, but others leave it vague. The healing factor theory says Jason doesn't just come back because of magic. His body actively repairs itself at an insane speed. The rotting skin and deformities aren't scars. They're evidence of constant regeneration that never fully heals. His brain repairs itself enough to keep him going, even when he takes damage that should be fatal. It's not canon, but fans like it because it makes Jason less of a zombie and more of a freak of nature. A biological monster who can't die because his cells refuse to stay dead. The camp counselors deserved it. Here's a theory that's less about Jason himself and more about the morality of the series. Fans sometimes argue that Jason isn't just a random killer. He's a kind of twisted moral judge, punishing teens who are careless, selfish, or irresponsible. Think about it. Most of Jason's victims are partying, drinking, or hooking up while ignoring responsibilities. That mirrors the original sin of the camp counselors who let Jason drown while they fooled around. In that sense, every kill is Jason's way of punishing people for repeating the same mistake. This idea leans into the slasher morality trope, horror movies punishing those who indulge in vice. Jason becomes less of a mindless killer and more of a punisher. It doesn't hold up perfectly, since he kills plenty of innocent bystanders too, but it explains why the franchise leans so hard into teenagers making dumb choices before meeting a machete. Jason and Freddy are connected through dreams. Freddy vs. Jason made the crossover official, but fans think the connection goes deeper than just one movie. The theory goes like this. Jason has always had a weird dreamlike quality to his appearances, especially early on. The ending of the first film, where boy Jason leaps out of the lake, plays like a nightmare sequence. His constant resurrections also feel dreamlike, with no explanation for how he comes back. Some fans argue Freddy has always had a hand in Jason's existence. Maybe Freddy latched onto Jason's death as a child, feeding on his fear and trauma, and that energy kept Jason's spirit alive in some form. By the time we get to Freddy versus Jason, it's not a new crossover, it's just finally showing their long-standing connection. It would explain why Jason sometimes seems like a dream figure, appearing and disappearing in ways that don't make sense. If Freddy had a tether to him all along, Jason might be more nightmare than flesh. Jason is really afraid of water. This one sounds funny at first, but it actually got some traction because of Freddy vs. Jason. In that movie, Freddy uses Jason's childhood trauma, drowning at Crystal Lake, to manipulate him. We see Jason as a terrified boy, dragged underwater and panicking. Some fans expanded that into the idea that Jason, even as an undead killing machine, still has a deep fear of water. That would explain why he's always lurking around the lake but rarely submerged in it for long. When he does end up underwater, he seems more sluggish and vulnerable, almost like the fear is holding him back. Of course, Jason Takes Manhattan muddies this theory, literally, when toxic waste transforms him into a childlike form again, but that might actually support it. Maybe his connection to water, drowning, sewer floods, lake resurrections, is a psychological weak point he can never shake, no matter how powerful he gets. Jason is a tragic hero, not a villain. This is one of the more sympathetic theories, and while it doesn't excuse the murders, it does reframe Jason's role in horror history. Fans argue Jason isn't truly evil. He's a tragic figure who was failed at every stage of life. He was a deformed kid mocked by peers, neglected by counselors, drowned in a lake, and then weaponized by his mother's grief. By the time he becomes the monster we know, he's less a villain and more the inevitable product of decades of pain. His killings, while brutal, are always tied to Crystal Lake and to people who echo the same mistakes that caused his death. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like on this video and subscribe to my channel.